All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Jerry Bartels. I'm an infrastructure technical specialist here at Autodesk. With me on the call today is Jeff Bartels and Dana Judge. They'll be doing questions in the background, so if at any time throughout today's presentation, if you have a question, please use the chat portion or the QA portion to post that, and we'll address that as we go through. And if for some reason by the end of the presentation, if we don't get to your question, we will absolutely reach out to you directly to make sure you get an answer to that. We're experimenting with a new venue today, so if for some reason there is a catastrophic failure, this session is being recorded. So I'm just going to take and press on, and we'll make sure that everybody that's registered or attended will get a link to that recording. So our session today in the 30-minute workout series is pushing common commands to the extreme. And the purpose of this series, for those people who maybe have been with us before, welcome back. Those people who may be new, welcome to the series. A lot of the folks that go through a training session as it relates to Civil 3D or MAP, or even if it was just AutoCAD, something AutoCAD based, the time that they go through the training, they go through the commands and the features that are the most relevant or most critical to their workflow, and trying to learn those other features and functions of the tool, because there's a lot in there. That's something that's acquired over time or they pick up from other folks. So we wanted to take this series of presentations, of these 30-minute presentations, to go through and cover some of those lesser known features to help drive some productivity and give you some background in some areas maybe you haven't seen before. So we like to try and start on time. We make sure and end on time because your time is valuable to us. We appreciate you being here, and hope you enjoyed the session. So today, as it relates to the commands that we're going to look at, I didn't want to spend the entire session on one command because that might get a little bit boring. So we're going to hop around some different aspects of several commands. So I thought for the first one, I asked Jeff, hey, this is going to be the first one out of the box. What command do you use most often? And he said undo. And I said, well, that's disturbing, as a matter of fact. But there are a lot of things that we can do with undo. Mainly, I can show you a couple of examples where we can use that as a time machine that will help us. We'll look at some different aspects of save and how we can do that, what benefits that can provide. We're going to look at ways we can improve performance by coupling XCLIP with index control, or setting a value on there to help demand load just the information we need. We're going to look at doing more with wildcards than just having an asterisk. We'll get into some other things with slides, and then if possible, if I have any time left, we'll get into some bonus content. Our presentations, if you've been with us before, we're traditionally the PowerPoint free zone, so we try and do everything as much as is possible within the application itself. So with that, I'm going to drop out of my PowerPoint here. I'm going to hop over to Civil 3D. And the first topic that I wanted to talk about is undo. We use undo quite a bit, that if you do something, you make a mistake, you want to recover from that or back up to the point where you want to undo the effects of the last command. We do that quite a bit. But if we type the command in, we get some other options. So for example, if I was going to copy, and I'm just going to type some commands in here so I can move quickly. If I was going to start laying out some trees, and Jeff is always good to point out that as we start doing some of these, the examples that we give are abstract because we're not trying to necessarily mimic anybody's entire workflow. Instead, what we're trying to do is just give you some understanding of how the tools work and not drill in any particular solving a design situation. These tools can be used for any number of things, so we try and keep the examples a bit abstract. All right, so I started laying out some trees. What I'm going to do, and I'm going to adjust my dialog here at the bottom. We'll move that up here to the top. What I want to do is I'm going to type in the command undo. And if I type that in at the command line, we'll say undo. We'll see we get a bunch of options available to us. Typically, people will hit U, or if you hit the back arrow here, it's just U. But if we type in undo, the command I'd like you to see is a command that's called mark. Basically, what mark does is it lets us capture a point in time that, okay, I want to drop a marker at this point in time, and then I'd like to go through and perhaps start laying in some more trees. I use this, or I used to use it quite a bit for doing some conceptual type layouts or work. It's like, okay, we'll go continue to lay some of this out. Not sure how that's going to work. Maybe we'll go through and make some changes to some of the geometry with the lots. Maybe I'll come through and erase, lose some other entities down here on the end. But as I've done my experimentation, I've reached a point where, you know what, I'm not liking the way that that's going. I'd like to go back to the point where I was before. So I'm going to type in the command undo, and then I'm going to use the option B for back. So if I select that, it will roll me back in time, undo all of the effects of the commands that I've done, back to that point where I've captured it. Now, the cool part about that is we can actually stack markers. So if I were to, we'll go ahead and say undo. We'll put a marker down here again. We'll say copy. We'll start to create some additional objects here. We'll reach a point in time. I'm going to type in undo again. We'll drop another marker. And I can keep dropping these markers at different points in time as I work, and then I can restore back to those points if need be. So we'll copy this. We'll continue on down the road, dropping additional trees or changing other geometry or exploring other design alternatives. At any time I'd like to take and roll back, we can say undo. I'll say back to go back to the previous point. I can then say undo. I could say back to go to the previous marker. All right. Now, important to remember, markers are drawing persistent, so that means when I get out of the drawing, all the markers are flushed. I can't come back tomorrow and roll back to a different point in time. It's only during the valid session that I'm currently in. So very, very powerful tool. Something else that we can do with this or couple this is with the save command. And there's actually 3 ways that we can save within Civil 3D or an AutoCAD-based application. The first one is QSave. That's where we click on the old 3.5-inch disc up here on the top. And if we hover over that, we see it's actually running a command called QSave. And what QSave does is, if we think about it from wherever our file lives initially, whether we open it or create a new one, I begin to start performing edits on it. And then at some point, I'm going to say save, and it's going to save back to this point. All right, that's what it does. If for some reason we lost power or something like that at this point in the process, or there could be 100 steps in here, I would be left with whatever my last save was. That's what we've been dealing with from the beginning. Another aspect of save that a lot of folks take advantage of is they'll take advantage of save as. With save as, it's similar to a save, but it allows us to leave the drawing and then start the editor again in a new drawing name. So for example, we start with design, we start to make some edits or changes. Now instead of doing a QSave, we do save as. It saves that out as a new drawing file, but what it does is it terminates that Civil 3D or that AutoCAD editing session. And from that point forward, the editing is now done in the new file. So we continue to work on this, we QSave, and it leaves us at this point when we do that. All right, both of these work well and good. I'm sure it's something that everybody on this call has done hundreds, if not thousands of times before. There is, however, another way that we can save that's a less commonly used way to save, and that's by typing the command save in at the command line. And what that does for us is it helps us with a couple of different situations. For example, if this project was something I worked on all day, and maybe it was a concept, I was laying something out, I reached a point, I like this, I don't like that, I maybe back up, I try something else. At the end of the day, I started with this and I ended with this. All right, those would be the files that I would have based on traditional saves. What I can do instead, I may have somebody look at this and say, well, that looks great, but why didn't you do something different with the utilities? Or why didn't you run the road this way? It's like, well, I tried that, but it didn't really fit very well. But they don't quite understand that because they weren't there at the point that we reached that situation. So what we can do instead, if we type the command save in at the command line, we can actually do something different. Let's start here at the bottom. From a save perspective, if I open a design file, I start to make changes. If I type in save, it is exactly the same as save as, in that it allows me to create a new drawing file, but it leaves me in the file that I'm in the editor, so I can continue to work. So I'll continue to work in that file. Maybe I do a save as. There's my final file, but now I've got an intermittent version. Maybe we'll come down here. We'll do open up that file. We'll make some changes. I laid out the utilities. You know what? I like that. I'm going to capture that off as a different name, as a concept for my sanitary. I'll do another one. This tree happened to be in the way that caused a conflict, made me had to reroute it. Somebody may have questions about that. I'm going to type in save, give that a different name, come up to the end, and then save at this point. So what it does for me is I have these intermittent files along the way. I never have to leave the editor. Okay? So we couple that with what we just looked at with undo back. We'll undo marker and undo back. We'll start in drawing. We'll start to make some changes like I was laying out trees. And then once I lay those trees out, I'm going to drop a marker with undo, and I'll save my file. And then from there, I can start working on alternate one. From that point, I can start making revisions till I reach a point that, you know what, yep, this is going to be option number 1. I'm going to type in save that off as a new drawing file. I'm then going to say undo back. It's going to take me right back to my point here. I'll drop another marker. I'll continue to lay out the next option. I'll type in save that off to a different file, undo back once again, drop another marker. I'll do it a third time to get my third option. All right, so by coupling those together, if we were to come back to undo here, if I were to start to lay this out, basically I would just say save. I'd type it in. After I type that in, I can give it the new name. We'll call this trees 1. And when I save that, I'm still in the file that I was in before. All right, I'm still in undo. I can continue to work, but I've captured the status at that particular point. All right, can be very helpful. All right, let's do this. I want to shift gears performance-wise. As I'm working with geometry or lots of geometry, or maybe in this case, I've got lots and lots of lots. All right, I need an example. We X-reference data quite a bit to help distribute our workload, if you will, such that I can take advantage of data in multiple files. Sometimes those files are large, and those files can have an impact on our performance. So I'm going to come back to my file here. Let's go ahead and X-reference that. So we'll X-reference our lots of lots. So we'll attach a DWG file. We'll go ahead and grab that. I'm going to add it as an attachment. Won't necessarily matter in this case whether it's an attachment or an overlay. There's about 165,000 parcels in there. When I put this together, I was trying to find borderline something that was big but wasn't going to kill me in a 30-minute presentation. So I've X-referenced that in here, and I've got all of this data now. All right, but my project exists in this location. That was my purpose for X-referencing this and maybe other things. So I want to limit what I see of this X-reference in this particular area. So I'm going to do that by creating an X-reference clip. I can reduce the size of what I see. Now I like to do circular type shapes. Sometimes that makes nice looking details, so we won't do a rectangle. I can't use a circle in a clip. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a polygon, and I'm going to make that of maybe 50 sides, because if I create a polygon of 50 sides, it really starts to look like a circle anyway. So we'll go ahead and create that. That's going to be the limits of my clip, the area that I would like to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my X-reference. I'm going to right-click, and then from the right-click menu, there's an option that says Clip X-reference. So we'll select that. I'm going to say I'd like to use a new boundary, select my polyline, and we'll select the polygon that we created, and that X-reference has been clipped. Now, the first question, and this is what the first thing that I asked when I did this was, well, after I've clipped it, have I effectively suppressed or limited from the drawing that I'm in? Am I carrying around all of this other data around the outside? And the short answer to that is you absolutely are. Is there a way that, since I'm only interested in the data that's here, that I can limit the information that's being displayed so that I'm only demand loading what I need and I'm not basically carrying all of this extra data that's unnecessary? And we do that through a tool that's called indexctl. I'm going to type that in here at the command line. So it's indexctl, and you see the value is 0. And it's important to remember, let's see what the values do. If we look at the values for indexctl, the 0 is typically the default. That's, unless you've ever changed it, that's what it will be. If you set it to 1, it means your file will be layer indexed, which means that no frozen layers will be brought in. They'll be identified so that they would not be loaded when you X-reference it. Spatial, it's going to determine everything's location. It's going to index the file for that, so it'll only bring in the things that are in the area that you're clipping. And then the last one is 3 layer and spatial indexes are created. All right, so we can set that. Now, the important thing to remember is we're not going to set that in this file where we're X-referencing it. We're going to set that in the data or the files that are being X-referenced. So I would set that in here, index CTL, and I would set that to 3. In this particular case, I want to do it by layer and spatial. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go through and like reload it. It didn't take long to load anyway. I'm sure you have many examples with surfaces and other things like that you can test it to confirm what I'm saying. But one thing that I want to make sure that you walk away with is I don't want you to think that I'll just set index CTL to 3 in every single file that I have, because I may or may not X-reference it in the future. It's one of those things, it's like ketchup. More isn't necessarily better. You want to make sure and set it only in the files that you're X-referencing, because when it's creating the indexes, it will actually increase the size of the file. And if I had to throw out a rough number, it would maybe increase the size of the file 5 to 10% for the extra information that's required. All right, so no reason to make your files bigger than need to be. But if you're X-referencing files, we would take and clip that. I'm going to take the my polyline out of here, and then if we were to make adjustments to this, going back to some of the grips stuff that Jeff showed us the other day, assuming those values were on, I would have only loaded the information that shows up in the window. If I were to change the outer boundary, Civil 3D or AutoCAD based application would automatically reach back in and demand load just the geometry that we need because we've got it indexed. Okay, so important thing that can help us quite a bit as it relates to performance. Okay, next thing I want to touch on is some wildcards. When we say wildcards in an AutoCAD based application, especially Civil 3D, a lot of us, including myself, will immediately gravitate to the asterisk. However, there are a lot of other commands, a lot of other wildcards that we can use. So if I take a look at wildcards, we'll have asterisk is what we use most often, but there are a ton of other ones as well that can also provide benefit. I wouldn't say that you need to memorize all of them, but there are times when any number of these can be helpful in isolating or tracking down exactly the thing that you're looking for. Now, some people may be looking like, well, what am I typing in to basically get this thing up on the screen that looks like another drawing? What I'm using is I'm exercising another tool in the application that has literally been in the application since way back in, I dare say, the late 80s. It's called Make Slide and V Slide. What that does for us is if I wanted to capture the contents of my screen, just an image, I'm not creating a raster image, I'm not creating something that can be viewed outside of AutoCAD or Civil 3D. Instead, I'm just capturing the display. I would type in M Slide, give it a name. We'll just call that Undo Slide. It would capture that. I could then email that to anybody that has an AutoCAD-based application. They could type in V-Slide, and they would be able to bring that up and see it. Like, for example, somebody wanted me to look at a particular aspect of a project where there's an oxbow on a river or something passing through that we needed to look at. The great part is it loads it up, I see the geometry, but as soon as I pan or anything, it's like non-destructive. It goes away. I didn't have to leave my drawing. I can continue working like I've been before. Can be a very useful tool going back and forth. That's why I've been using it to bring up some of those charts rather than having to flip over to something else. Okay, with those, let's take a quick look. The easiest way to look at wildcards is by looking at the layer dialog box, and we'll look at creating a filter. I'm going to use this today just because it's a good example of using filtering layers with wildcards. We'll have maybe another session where we spend more time on the filtering itself. But for example, I've got a lot of layers, and in many cases, those layers will have some standardization with names and how they're numbered and things like that. In this particular case, I've got some layers that begin with construction, CONST. By default, and I'm sure it's small on the screen, there's an asterisk there. So anything I type in, CONST, like dash asterisk, that is showing me the results of all of those layers in the bottom. Well, what if instead I didn't want an asterisk? What if instead I put in a question mark, which will match any one character? That would give me, 1, 2, 3, whether it's numeric or alphabet, doesn't matter. If I matched 2 characters, it's not 1 or 2, it's got to be 2. It matches those. If we were looking for things that were just numeric, I would put in a pound sign. If I were looking for things that were just alphabet, I would put in an @ symbol. All right, and we can continue to put in other things as well. I could say at and then an asterisk. That's going to give me the individual letters, and then anything that was after that began with a letter, so you can mix and match. Another one that's very helpful is we'll have a tilde sign, and I could say CONST dash. That's going to show me all of the layers except for any of the construction layers. All right, so I can filter layers. I can use these for any number of things. I have one more that we'll do. We'll say construction. I can do some things in brackets. We'll say I want to do 1-3, and then I'll close brackets, and it will allow me to do that. I can separate things with commas. There are tons of things that can be done with wildcards that can be very popular. Like I said, I gravitate to asterisks quite a bit as well, but there's a lot of other tools in there with respect to wildcards that can also be very helpful. These wildcards can also be used for other commands. They can be used for different reasons. Like I just used a hyphen in here that allowed me to find a range of values within brackets. I can also use a hyphen outside of the layers command to activate the actual the command line version of a command. So for example, to execute layer, I clicked on this up at the top. When I do that, it's actually launching a command down here at the bottom that's being suppressed, but we'll type in LA for layer. When we hit it, we get the dialog box. If I didn't want the dialog box version of that command, I'm going to put that hyphen in front of it to say LA. I now get the layer command, and I get options for all the different commands or all the different tools or features that we would have within that dialog box. For the most part, we can't hit them all, but we can get at quite a few. Same with xref. If I were to say -xref, it gives me the command line version of what we can do with that tool. And because of that, there are many useful commands that we can create from a command line basis to help make us more productive. For example, using that aspect of what we're looking at here. A lot of times when I work on a file, especially if it's not something I'm familiar with, I want to know what all is in here. All right, so I need to go through the process. Is just what I see on the screen everything that's here? Absolutely not. There's going to be other stuff that is potentially on a layer that's off. So I'm going to type in minus layer, and then I'm going to say on. And when it says layer names to turn on, I'm going to use my wildcard asterisk, and I'm going to hit enter, and then I'm going to hit enter again. And if I back up a little bit, I see there were objects on layer or layers that were off. Is that everything? I'm sure everybody's telling the screen right now, no, that's not everything. We go back into the layer command, and we want to take and thaw, because there may be things that are frozen. So we'll thaw, I'm going to say asterisk, and we'll hit enter to get out. And yep, there were some things that were in here that were frozen. Is that everything? No, that's still not everything, because there is this tool that we have down here at the bottom, which is isolating objects. If I right click, I can say isolate objects. Some things may have been hidden. I can click on end object isolation. And when I do that, we see what the actual command line is on isolate objects. That's everything then that was hidden. And finally, is that still everything that I may be in this file? Everything's displayed, but I may not be seeing it all. I'd hit Z for zoom, and I'd hit E for extents. And there are always seems to be some stuff that happens to be out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. All right. So I went through a number of steps to go through and just try and verify what all is in this file. Is there a way that I can automate that, even get it to a point where I can just tell it to do that and have it do it for me? And the answer to that is yes. This has been a perfect opportunity for undo mark. So I'm going to start walking back through my undos. So we'll get back to prior to that happening. And if I back up, that information's out. So like last time we were together, let's take a quick look at this. I'm going to come out here. We will create a new text file. That new text file, I'm going to call this, we'll just call it Jerry for right now, and I'm going to call it LSP. This is a non-destructive way of doing customization that I can use on any machine, anywhere that's AutoCAD based, and it can be something that's not persistent. In other words, when I'm done using that workspace or whatever, it can go away. I'm going to open this up. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a parenthesis, and I'm going to say command, and I'm going to start telling it all the things that I'm going to put into the command line. So basically what we just looked at, layer, and then the next thing was on, and then the next thing we'll say is what we want to turn on was asterisk, and then I hit the next thing was thaw. We want to thaw everything. What do I want to thaw? I want to thaw asterisk, and then I had to hit enter to get out. Next thing I had to do was unisolate. Unisolate objects was the command. We saw that at the command line. And then the other thing we wanted to do was zoom, and we'll hit E for extents, and we'll wrap that up. And then if you remember, I put at the beginning of that, it'd be great to have an undo mark so I can recover from that when I'm done. So we're going to say undo, and we'll say marker. So we've just created a tool that's going to basically go through and do all of that for us. So now that we've saved that, let's drag this in. We drag it in. It's going to say, hey, wait a minute. This is a LISP file. Do you trust this person that created it? I'm going to say load once so that it's not persistent. I don't want to always load it until I'm sure it works. We take and run it, and boom, it took us right to that spot. Everything is, I can now zoom, pan, do everything I need to do. And if I want to restore the effects of that, I'm going to say undo, and we'll say B for back, and I'm right back to where I was before. All right, now, I don't want to have to keep dragging that in, although dragging it in is not that big a deal. Can I turn this into an actual command? Let's maybe up the game from the last time we looked at this. I can. I'm going to come here to the beginning, and we'll look at one other thing as well, just so you understand the reasoning behind it. When I run that, you see when the command is done, it says nil. It's not a big deal. It's just one more thing that, you know, when it's over, the LISP that was created, it's not passing back any value, so it says nil. We can suppress that from screen just to make that clean that up a little bit. So let's do this. I'm going to say defun, which means define function. I'm going to say C:, for something I can type at the command line, and my command is going to be on. And then I'm going to say open and close parentheses, because what that's going to do is if the program had any parameters or whatever, I'm not using any of those. Then if I want to suppress that nil from being displayed at the end, I put in PRINC. That will take that out. Why is it spelled that way? Somebody probably knows. I don't know. I just know if I put that at the end, it doesn't display the nil. So we've built a new command called on. We'll go ahead and we'll say save. And now what we'll do is when we click on this and drag it in, it says it brought it in, and I've got a new command now that's called on. So if at any point I want to see everything, I want everything to be visible in the file, I'm going to type on, and the cool thing is as you type it, you see it actually now becomes part of the autocomplete. So here's an important thing. Make sure to kind of test your commands so you know before you're not overwriting another command. We'll say on, I'll hit enter. It goes through, it completes what we needed it to. I'll say undo. I can go back when I'm done, and I'm right back to where I was before. All right, so very powerful thing. Once again, non-destructive. We can take and load it at will, do what we need to, and then it can kind of dissolve itself when we're done. So with that, we've covered a lot of information. Once again, like I said, we want to make sure that we're respectful of your time. I'll open it up. I know we don't have time for questions. Were there any that we need to get back to folks, Jeff and Dana?
We're all good on this end.
Okay, fantastic. Well, then I will let you folks get back on with your day. Thank you very much again for spending a half an hour with us. As we said, we know your time's valuable, and we appreciate you investing some of that with us today. So we look forward to seeing you again in the next one. Watch for an email. We'll give you a link to the recording for this if you want to review anything we covered or maybe share it with somebody else in your organization. Have a great day.